There is no sleep. Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, and joining me, the man behind the scenes, currently projecting, changing, sifting through everything as it pertains to our never too early rankings, live on the site for everyone right now, friend in life, John Paulsen. Paulsen, how has the first 48 hours of quote-unquote tampering gone for you?
It hasn't been bad. I would say this morning, since Aaron Rodgers appeared on the Pat McAfee show, I've been dealing with a lot of trade compensation, trade leverage experts on Twitter. I certainly have my point of view, and people follow me, and then they tell me I'm wrong. I don't have a lot of people coming out and saying, John, you're right, because they just like my tweet, and then they move on with their day. But I get a lot of people that are very passionate about the fact that the Packers have no trade leverage in my mentions here for the last half hour as I was getting ready for this live stream. So I'm excited to talk about some other topics today, John. Are you?
Actually, very excited because I think there's been a lot of important movement that we will get to. We will save some important names like Ezekiel Elliott being cut in the fallout for Tony Pollard, Juju Smith-Schuster signing with the Patriots, and much, much more for Thursday's episode, because you and I are going to pack in 2 episodes back to back on Wednesday and Thursday for everyone to make sure we sweep and have our spin on every signing. But there's a lot to get to from that first Monday through Tuesday window. And I want to start with the trade that shook the 2023 NFL draft completely up. And the Bears, as we expected, moving out from the number 1 overall pick to the Panthers for not only the number 9 overall pick, but also the second round selection, number 53 overall, and this year's draft, number 61 overall, actually. And then next year's first and second round pick from Carolina as well to go along with DJ Moore. Moore, of course, will be 26 years old throughout this upcoming season. No more guaranteed money left on his contract. So I would argue an amazing player to have under contract and to grow with what you are hoping is your franchise quarterback. And on top of all of that, I think it's easily arguable that there is no DJ Moore among this rookie wide receiver class. So no matter where the Bears picked anyways, they weren't going to find a better wide receiver than Moore among all the options, Jackson Smith and Jigba included. So knowing all of this, what are your thoughts on DJ Moore and Justin Fields together in 2023 with Chicago?
Yeah, interesting point you brought up about the rookie class and getting more in this year. It's also, look at the free agent class. It's not great either. So this was a good get for them. We've been as fantasy analysts waiting for DJ Moore to be freed or to get a good quarterback or something or other to happen with him. From 2019 to 2021, he had 3 straight 1,100 plus yard seasons. Last year, in theory, was going to be an upgrade to Baker Mayfield. That certainly did not pan out. He finished with 63 catches for 888 yards and 7 touchdowns. The 7 touchdowns was a career high, but the 888 yards is well below his previous 3 seasons. I think you look at this, and we're in another in theory situation with Moore's stock, because in theory, Justin Fields is an upgrade to anybody he's had over the last 3 or 4 years, other than, I guess, Cam Newton. But it's still theory. We don't know exactly what Justin Fields is. We have some signal that he could be good. The Bears didn't trust him really early last season to throw the ball much, but over the second half of the season, he threw the ball more. His pass attempts were starting to get close to 30 a game, or closer to 30, not quite 30 a game. But so in theory, this is good. This is a good move for DJ Moore. He gets some stability at quarterback. It could still backfire on him if Fields is not what we hope or think he might be. But I think I didn't move him up a whole lot in the rankings because my thinking was that the Panthers were going to have an improved quarterback situation next year regardless. So, ending up with somebody like Fields was probably definitely within the range of outcomes for the Panthers heading into 2023. So I did move him up a little bit, but he's still ranked wide receiver 22 as a low end wide receiver 2 with some mid-range wide receiver 2 upside.
Justin Fields, of course, being drafted as a top 5 quarterback right now, which makes sense on Underdog, given that once Luke Getsy figured out how to design and concertedly scheme more runs for Fields across his last 11 starts, that's when he'd rattled off a QB1, a top 12 finish, and 10 of his last 11 starts, including 5 top 5 finishes and 2 overall QB1 finishes, both coming against the Lions, where he rushed for over 100 yards against. Having said that, I did want to try and put regression into context, because remember, the Bears averaged not only a league low 22.2 pass attempts per game, which is even funny saying that out loud, but that was actually the fewest and the first time any team averaged less than 23 pass attempts per game since the 1979 Chiefs, which I don't remember. I was still a afterthought in a bottle of booze, most likely. But prior to last season, because it's hard to put the Bears' 22 attempts into a bucket and say, how will this regress, and will it regress? Will it increase? What we do know, though, if we bump up the rates a little bit, prior to last year, 16 teams averaged 28 pass attempts or less since 2011, basically 12 years worth of sample. And among those 16 teams, 13 increased in average pass attempts per game the following year, averaging 4 more pass attempts per game. Not only that, but those 16 teams averaged 31.4 pass attempts the next season. So we are thinking just logically, in terms of play calling regression, the Bears are going to pass more. And if we are getting that with Fields design runs for an entire 17-game slate, honestly, Paulsen, that's top 2 quarterback territory.
Yeah, I think Fields is certainly justified to be in the top 5. That's where I have him right now. I have him behind Allen, Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow at the moment. I'm looking at his game log, and he started the season with 17, 11, and 17 pass attempts. And it was week 4 against the Giants where he finally crested 20 pass attempts. And he didn't go below that number the rest of the season, but he also didn't throw for more than 30. So he never got to 30 pass attempts. So you're probably going to see somewhere in the range of, since he averaged 21.2, you're probably going to see him in the range of about 25 pass attempts. And then if you're adding in maybe 8 runs to 10 runs a game, you certainly are going to have a very good fantasy asset there on a weekly basis.
If you're locked into 44.com right now, you also saw that among our free articles in the free agency tracker, completely free, our player profiles for fantasy, completely free on the site right now as well. On the free agent tracker, though, as I wrote, Tremaine Edmonds, T.G. Edwards combined for $62 million guaranteed among linebacker. Some people were upset about that, but remember, the Bears had a league high in cap space coming into the new league year, and they have a threshold to reach. That's the important part. So getting a player like Tremaine Edmonds, even for what would normally be considered egregious for an off-ball linebacker, 4-year, $72 million deal, again, the Bears have to reach a certain number. So it's inconsequential that they gave this money to players that can help in what was the league's worst front 7 over the second half of the season once they traded all their important players like Roquan Smith, like Robert Quinn in the second half of the year. But if you are locked into the free agent tracker and profiles, you also saw the Bears moved on from David Montgomery as he signs a 3-year, $18 million contract with the Lions. And I think that team, Paulsen, is important to note because that is an organization that just got 1,000 yards and 17 touchdowns from him. And they had enough confidence in David Montgomery, not only to go ahead and sign him rather than continuing to negotiate through a new deal with Jamal Williams, who they loved, but they also gave David Montgomery $11 million in guaranteed money, which is quietly the 4th most guaranteed money of any running back since 2020 in the free agent market. I think that tells you how much confidence they have in him and replacing him for Jamal Williams. So what are your thoughts on David Montgomery, who I'm expecting to lead this backfield in touches this year?
Yeah, you look at the age of the 2 players, and I think they saw an opportunity depending on what Jamal Williams was asking for. Jamal Williams is going to turn 28 here in April, and Montgomery doesn't turn 26 until June, so he's 2 years younger. I would say talent-wise, and maybe you have a different opinion, but they're pretty similar players. Neither one of them are burners. They're both bigger backs, but they are both can catch the ball. I think Montgomery will just take over this Jamal Williams role and either be the RB1A or RB1B with DeAndre Swift. And it seems like they are reluctant to give Swift too much work. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. Even when he came back and was in theory healthy, not on the injury report, last year, he wasn't seeing heavy touches with any consistency. So I think they want to use him in spots, and they need to have another running back that's talented in order to kind of execute their running game, which is really strong. So this really did help Montgomery's stock quite a bit, because we go from, being the RB1 in Chicago, limited offense, limited scoring, to a pretty potent Lions running game. And we saw how many touchdowns Williams scored. So I wondered if Evan Silva, our friend, will be placing a bet on Montgomery to score the most touchdowns this season, because you probably get decent odds right now.
Where do Swift and Montgomery now move in your never too early rankings for all subscribers on the site? Because I think there is a bit of an argument to be made for rushing touchdown production declining for the Lions this year. I wonder if it's actually sticky that they will lead the league in both carries and touchdowns from the 1 yard line again, where Jared Goff only threw 5 passes from the 1 yard line. I don't think that can sustain. But as we mentioned earlier, at the same time, I am fully expecting Montgomery to lead this backfield in touches this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can bet that they'll have a lot of goal line carries. I mean, there's not much changing here. They still have a great offensive line. They still have Jared Goff at quarterback, so it's not like they're going to start suddenly throwing from inside the 5. The regression might come sort of naturally, but you still might see them with 15 plus rushing touchdowns. I have Swift right now at 17. I have Montgomery at 21. And it's just tough to put Montgomery over Swift, because I like Swift as a player so much more. But I think in realistic terms, I don't think the chances that Montgomery is going to outscore Swift are negligible. It might be better than 50-50, because you're talking about the touches, you're talking about the goal line back, and he also can catch the ball. So, and you have Swift, who's a little bit injury prone. So it is dicey taking him, but you're just hoping that one of these years you get Swift for 17 games and you can see what he can do in 10 to 15 touches per game, because he's really talented. I think they're both RB2s, and whether or not you want to shoot for upside or shoot for that floor is probably the decision between those two.
And even as someone who I had to check last night has drafted him in 60% of best ball teams so far, I can certainly tell you it is worrisome that Swift is a day 2 player who had single-digit touches in 6 of his last 10 games. Not the best outlook for him with Montgomery in the lineup now. Another big shakeup for an entire organization over the last 48 hours was Aaron Rodgers grandstanding, even though he swears he doesn't want the attention, on the Pat McAfee show, saying that he has intended since last week to play for the New York Jets. And now it really just comes down to the compensation the Packers want in return. But overall, Paulsen, it looks like Aaron Rodgers will, in fact, be playing with the New York Jets and his old running mate, Allen Lazard, who signed for a 4-year, $44 million contract during the tampering window. So discuss the Jets offense and outlook for 2023.
And maybe you can comment on whether or not you think Corey Davis will be back. I got shot down.
They can save $10.5 million by cutting him. I would think he's gone.
Okay. So I guess the other key piece then is Elijah Moore. Whether or not he comes over to the Packers in this trade, it would be good for the Packers to get another good young receiver for Jordan Love in that situation. But you're looking at the weapons for Rodgers, and Garrett Wilson, Rookie of the Year. Allen Lazard is a fine second, third option. Whether or not Corey Davis remains or Moore is maybe that third player, rounding out the receiving core there. They have a couple of tight ends that are decent, Uzama and Tyler Conklin, if I remember correctly. And they have good pass catching backs with Breece Hall and Michael Carter. So it's a nice set of weapons. They have a pretty good offensive line. They got a great defense. I don't know that Rodgers is watching him this year, he was sort of hamstrung by his receiving core. I tweeted out that the beginning of the end of the Rodgers era was when Devontae Adams requested a trade, because that really put them in a tough spot at the receiver position without having their stud. And he was just sort of playing with a short deck first half of the season, and things kind of got going with Christian Watson midseason. But the offense was never really rolling. I think he'll be really motivated to prove the naysayers wrong. It just felt like things in Green Bay were getting a little bit stale, and that he wasn't going to come back and have an MVP type year or a Super Bowl run, just given the way things were ending and kind of wrapping up last season. So with that all said, I think he has a chance, given the quarterback landscape. He will have a chance for low-end QB1 numbers. We're looking at guys right now like Tua. We're not sure about his overall health at 10, Geno Smith at 11, Daniel Jones at 12, Kirk Cousins at 13. Kyler Murray's going to be on the shelf for first part of the season. We don't know what Deshaun Watson has left. He was really pretty bad last year, and we're kind of counting on him to shake that rust off and become a good player again. Russell Wilson, we don't know what's going to happen with him and Sean Payton. So I think Rodgers is in that sort of group where he has a wide range of outcomes, and he could end up giving low-end QB1 value given the improvement of his weapons from year to year. And remember, 2 years ago he was MVP, 3 years ago he was MVP, finishing in the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks. So there is a chance, a motivated Rodgers that's hungry, and if they're willing to throw the ball, he could certainly return low-end QB1 numbers. I think this is obviously good for Garrett Wilson. Big upgrade at quarterback for him. Lazard's, looking at wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type value if he's the number 2 target there.
My concern is what you mentioned, because a lot of people are citing that an Aaron Rodgers bounce back year, but you can't quantify it. Everyone is basically saying because of spite, because of the hate in his heart, that's why he's going to have a great season. When last year, as you mentioned, he was burnt out. He was tapped out. One top 12 finish all year long, does not provide any rushing floor. We're going to get a surgence of Anthony Richardson, of CJ Stroud, who can compete for a top 12 quarterback solely by rushing. Like, this old guard is getting pushed out of fantasy altogether. And that's what concerns me about Rodgers. But really, I don't think people are asking about Rodgers. I think what's more important is to get your ranking on and the fallout of Garrett Wilson and Allen Lazard together. Because I swear to you, I sat at that free agent tracker for 20 minutes thinking of something to write about Allen Lazard, and there were 2 sentences that came up. One, he's a dog. Like, he's obviously one of the best run blockers in the talent will in no way in hell usurp Garrett Wilson, in my opinion. I do think it's notable that the chemistry between him and Rodgers is important. That from week 10 on, that Cowboys game on last year, Lazard quietly out-targeted Christian Watson, 6.7 per game to 4.7 targets per game. So it's clear that Rodgers trusts Lazard. Now, does that give him a ceiling? I don't think so. I think we're looking at more sporadic, unpredictable spike weeks for him as a high floor option. But what are your thoughts on Wilson and Lazard?
Yeah, I don't think Lazard was built to be the number 1 option for a real NFL team. I think he's a complimentary guy. He can get open. As you mentioned, he's well known for his great run blocking. So Rodgers likes him. So he'll get his 4 to 7 targets per game, I think, in that range. And we'll have a couple of breakout weeks. He'll have some touchdowns. But Wilson is the star of this offense. He's the star of this receiving core. I mean, I think heading into this season, we thought Elijah Moore might be it could hold on to that number 1 role, or could be a 1A or 1B to Wilson's 1A, or vice versa. But as the season wore on, Wilson certainly outshined Moore, and Moore was basically just a disappointment in this offense last year. So I think Wilson you're looking at high-end wide receiver 2 with low-end wide receiver 1 type upside, given he has a capable quarterback now. I mean, he was getting passes thrown to him from Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and we're going from that to Rodgers, who he does have a declining production, but I think he's still a big upgrade over those players I just mentioned. So I think you're looking at Wilson probably going in the 3rd, 4th round. and with this upgrade, but we'll have to see how the rest of this Jets receiving core shapes up. And it seems like I've lost John Daigle, who will be back here momentarily. So let me just pontificate on the Rodgers and the Packers leverage. I got into a couple of tiffs on Twitter, people telling me I'm a biased Packer fan because I think the Packers still have leverage in this. I don't think that his appearance on the Pat McAfee show really changes the dynamic. Everybody knows that there is a trade in the works, and now that he has said that he wants to play for the Jets and the Jets want him, I don't think that really puts the Packers in a bad situation. They have until September 1st before the bonus money needs to be paid out, and I think they can wait and make sure that they get a fair compensation. I don't see that there's any rush to this, but I'm sure this will be looked at from every angle. And I'm hoping for a first-round pick. But if it was a second and Elijah Moore, maybe a conditional pick based on whether or not Rodgers plays multiple seasons for the Jets, that would be good. If you have any questions, if you're watching live, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask, because I'm vamping right now, waiting for Mr. Daigle to get back. There he is.
Where did you leave off at?
I just pontificated a little bit about the Packers' leverage in the trade. Basically, just saying Garrett Wilson is a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2, and kind of left it at that from a fantasy standpoint.
Perfect. The live audience got a treat in seeing me reset my modem. This will be edited out in the podcast, obviously. Moving on to another organization with a massive shakeup in the last 24 hours. The Raiders fallout from Jimmy Garoppolo. Yes, a 3-year, $72.5 million contract roughly on the surface. But remember, you need to look at the dead cap money, basically. And the first year a quarterback can get cut and save money for that team against the cap. That tells you really how long their deal is, because that tells you the amount of time they have to prove they should be on the team and not be expendable in order to save money on their behalf. And for Jimmy Garoppolo, it's basically a 1-year deal. Since next offseason even, the Raiders can save roughly $9 million by just cutting him if he doesn't pan out this year. But beyond Jimmy Garoppolo, we also had Jakobi Meyers signed for $11 million annually. We had Darren Waller traded to the Giants. And now we believe, with Garoppolo in the fold, that this team has just suddenly become Josh McDaniels' reimagination of a Patriots offense, which does not sound sexy in particular. Yes, Garoppolo finished 7th in the league last year, 9th in the league overall in yards per attempt from 11 personnel. The Raiders only ran 11 personnel, 3 wide sets at the 15th highest rate in the league. So we're expecting that rate to surge. But overall, let's talk about the fallout here, beginning with Davante Adams from Garoppolo, because right now Adams is being drafted as the overall wide receiver 7 within the first 10 picks of the Underdog Big Board draft. What are your thoughts on if Adams can hold on to low-end wide receiver 1 status from Jimmy G?
I think he can. I think he's that good. I don't see Garoppolo as a big downgrade from Derek Carr, 2022 Derek Carr. They're actually similar fantasy players in that they, throw for their 230 to 250 yards, some touchdowns, and then don't add anything as runners. So the pass attempts should be there. There's not a lot of taking off and running with Jimmy Garoppolo. He'll be interesting to watch heading into this season in terms of his overall stats, because he's been well over 8 yards per attempt for most of his career. And the question is that a function of the Shanahan offense in San Francisco, or is that, Jimmy G has this sort of talent? He did average 8 yards per attempt in his last season with the Patriots, but it was only on 63 pass attempts. He had 4 touchdowns, no interceptions in roughly 2 games there. So if he's got a pretty nice hand dealt to him. He's going back to Josh McDaniels, he's familiar with his offense, et cetera. And he's got a nice receiving core for the most part, even after the Darren Waller trade. We'll see what they do with their backup tight end. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was pretty good in stints. Go ahead.
Well, Foster Moreau, that's the thing,
Moreau.
is also a free agent right now.
He's a free agent,
so,
yeah.
Unrestricted too. So that's why I'm assuming more 3-wide sets for them this year. And honestly, I am stagnant. Like I think Adams' ADP is right on the mark. I'm okay with that still being in that mid wide receiver 1 range because remember, yes, Garoppolo has not been a good deep passer. And of course, 41% of Adams' receiving yards last year occurred on throws 21 yards or 20 yards downfield. But at the same time, Adams was sandwiched a career high 30% of his targets last year in his first year under McDaniels, and that intermediate level of the field, 10 to 19 yards out. And the intermediate level of the field is Garoppolo the last 2 seasons with San Francisco has completed 64% of his passes compared to Carr, who ranked 29th with 52% of his passes completed there last year. So it's at least an upgrade into that high floor reception range, hoping Adams can just get yak after that. And so that's why I'm still high on Adams. What about the ancillary players here, though? Because people will definitely want to jam in Jakobi Meyers as a high floor option. And your thoughts on Hunter Renfro's fallout with Waller out the picture.
Yeah, with Waller out of the picture, I'm a little bit more bullish on Jakobi Meyers. I think if you looked at Waller there with Adams and Hunter Renfrow, and Meyers probably as a replacement or an upgrade over Hunter Renfrow, it's hard to see Meyers seeing the sort of target volume that he saw in New England alongside Devontae Adams. But with Waller out of the way, it's possible that he could see 7 to 8 targets per game and be fairly productive in that role. I think Jakobi Meyers was the best pure receiver of this free agent class and a good route runner and really productive in his time with New England. But playing alongside Adams tends to depress your volume. And he's going from the number 1 receiver in New England to the number 2 option at best with Vegas. So he'll be ranked, in that probably in that 35 to 50 range, depending on what they do at tight end. If they retain Foster Moreau, which I think is a possibility now, given the fact that Waller is gone, then I think Foster Moreau will be kind of a sleeper breakout tight end possibility for fantasy purposes.
What about, I actually wanted to ask that, Waller, because we are all trying to figure out the right approach at tight end, since Travis Kelce clearly finished with 4 more points per game in his position than the tight end 2, George Kittle, in points per game last year. To me, it's not even about Waller, honestly. It's about Saquon Barkley losing some value because ever since the combine, whenever Brian Dable and Joe Shane reiterated 3 to 5 times, I believe, that the number 1 priority this offseason was getting receivers for Daniel Jones, that tells you that Saquon Barkley was never going to lead his team in targets again. As Saquon Barkley, who finished 4th highest among all running backs and share of team targets, was not going to do that again. So not only does Waller take away from that and from Barkley, in my opinion, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's still 2 more big signings to come for Daniel Jones to play around Isaiah Hodgins. So your thoughts on Waller and where he fits in your early rankings?
Yeah, I mean, the tight end landscape's pretty rough. He's a good pass catching tight end, so I've got him as a low end tight end 1. It didn't really change his outlook going from Garoppolo to Daniel Jones with the Giants. I think that there are more targets up for grabs. I think you alluded to that with the Giants, given the state of their receiving core. But they're going to get Wan'Dale Robinson back. They did find something, I think, in Hodgins. They like him quite a bit. They re-signed Sterling Shepard, who has never averaged, if my memory serves, less than 50 yards receiving since his rookie season. He just has had trouble staying healthy the last couple seasons. But I think that goes for Waller as well. So there is still a path, I think, for Barkley to really return high-end RB1 value if some of these guys get nicked up like they have been getting nicked up. I mean, Waller has played 17 total games the last 2 seasons. 20 total games the last 2 seasons, 11 in 2021 and 9 in 2022. And his his production declined last year to 43 yards per game. I think that's something that had to do and sort of underlines my previous point about Devontae Adams coming into an offense and the sort of target share that he demands. But I think Waller, he's entering his age 31 season. He has a chance for a big role there, given the nature of that receiving core right now.
And yes, Renfrow has performed significantly better without Waller on the field in the past, but I don't think that trend upholds, given that we are now adding Jakobi Meyers to the mix. Adams, of course, being their new X receiver who's supposed to win routes. Meyers, who is supposed to do all the dirty work as a high floor option from the slot and will split out wide. Actually second in the league, by the way, in yards per route run from the outside last year on very, very limited routes run. And then, of course, Renfrow will come in to help move the chains on third down. But in my opinion, Renfrow certainly the third option and the loser from the Meyers addition. You spoke of running backs being nicked up, and the poster boy of that is none other than Rashaad Penny, a very affordable 1 year, roughly up to $3 million contract added to Philadelphia's backfield alongside Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott, who was brought back on a 1 year, $2 million deal. And I'm trying to temper my expectations for Penny because I really do believe the Eagles aren't done and will add someone of significance in their backfield. But upon initial glance, it's obviously hard not to get excited. Led all running backs in yards after contact per attempt last season. Over the last 2 years, is second only to Nick Chubb in rate of runs to go 10+ yards, and has 5 overall RB1 finishes in his last 9 full games, including 2 RB1 finishes on the week. So now, playing behind the best offensive line of his entire career, where do you stand on Penny in 2023?
Well, they re-signed Boston Scott, which was kind of an underappreciated or it's kind of under the radar type of a signing. So I think they might be done at running back. Penny, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell as the trio, with Penny basically replacing Miles Sanders, and Miles Sanders basically saying that he's moving on and whatever, thanks for everything. So I think what happened, maybe he was asking for too much money. They went out and found a bargain in Penny because he can't stay healthy, and they're hoping that a new training staff and a new 1 year contract for him will help him stay healthy this season. So I'm really interested to see where his ADP lands, because from a talent standpoint, you mentioned it, all the metrics say that he is outstanding in terms of being a talent at the running back position. So can he stay healthy? And if he's going in the 5th, 6th round, then I think that there's a ton of upside. There's league winning type upside given the offensive line for the Eagles, the strength of that running game, the number of times they're in the red zone, goal line carries available potentially for him. He could have a big year. And Miles Sanders had a big year. He was a very good pick in that 5th, 6th round this last season, outperformed a lot of other players in that so-called RB dead zone. So it's hard not to get excited. You just look at his injury history, though, and I think that's going to depress his ADP a little bit. I think the 4th round would be probably too much, but maybe 5th, 6th round, it's time to pull the trigger on Rashaad Penny.
And yes, I do believe Penny, who oddly enough was never injured, didn't miss a single game in college, could be injured with Philadelphia. You're going to hear that argument a lot from people throughout the offseason, but it doesn't matter when you're running back Will Fuller. When you can literally win your week on a moment's notice by simply staying healthy, that's a player you draft. And you mentioned his ADP. I know he was going in the 14th round prior to being signed. And over the last 48 hours, and we have a very small sample, I've seen him go as early as the 7th round. So I think people are very high. I probably just think there's another incoming addition, given not only Philadelphia's draft capital, but just the way they use their backfield. Maybe also I just don't want to be let down. I don't want to get too high, because I will get very high on Penny if you allow me to. Someone, though, I will not be getting high on at all is the Tampa Bay receivers. After Baker Mayfield signed a prove-it deal, 1 year, $8.5 million, to compete with Kyle Trask. I don't know if you think they're done now under center. I somewhat believe they could be. And so I'm past the being worried stage for Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. I always forget what's the highest level of DEFCON. Is it DEFCON 2? That's the highest the United States has reached, right?
That's the highest we've reached, I believe. DEFCON 1 is the highest. Right?
Okay. I'm in DEFCON. Okay. I'm not going to say I'm in DEFCON 1. I am in DEFCON 2 with Godwin and Evans, given that they are not only going to be catching passes from Mayfield or Trask, but the volume is not there anymore. Like the Bucs led the league in pass plays per game the last 2 years, over 43 in each of those seasons. And now you have Mayfield and Trask. It's not going to happen. So not only will you be depending on inefficient throws, you won't get volume either, in my opinion. So I'm out on the Bucs receivers entirely. Where do you stand in your rankings so far?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down. I mean, I don't think that Baker Mayfield, I'm no longer of the school that he's going to be an upgrade over anything anymore. Like it seems like he went into Carolina. It was kind of a disaster. He did pretty well with McVay and the Rams. So, kudos to McVay for getting that out of him. But I don't have any trust now in Mayfield being an upgrade over Kyle Trask. Kyle Trask is a former, I'd love to hear your opinion on him. I don't know much about him. I don't watch a lot of college football, but he was a former second-round pick by the Bucs. He had 44,283 yards passing and 43 touchdowns against 8 interceptions, completed 69% of his passes, 9.8 yards per attempt. I mean, that all sounds pretty good. What's the knock on him that he can't come in and provide like Tom Brady light, 45-year-old Tom Brady light type numbers?
He was a turnover machine in his final year at Florida. I'd have to go back and read my profile on him. I believe it's on the site.
He had 8 interceptions. So
what about fumbles?
I'm looking.
I could be wrong. I need to go find my profile. But I know it's not a player I am concerned about.
Okay. So we'll see. They said that it was interesting that they said that he would have started if Brady hadn't come back. Yet Blaine Gabbert was always the one that was active on game day. That doesn't show a lot of confidence in him. I think also you alluded to it. Like they're going to run the ball more. Brady was one of the highest volume, if not the highest volume quarterback last 2 seasons there in Tampa, and they're probably going to go to more of a ball control defense type attack. So that's gonna hurt Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as well. Love them as receivers, but from fantasy assets, they're certainly declining in value with Brady's retirement.
Another big winner in free agency, I believe, is Samjae Perine, recruited to the Broncos by Sean Payton for a 2-year, $7.5 million contract. And I still think it's going overlooked that this will be Javonte Williams' J.K. Dobbins season, and that he's going to be overdrafted for a player that has high, if not probable odds of being healthy scratched in week 1 and just not performing at all and being brought along slowly after an ACL tear. So understanding that Perine has handled the workload in the past. As recently as last year, he made 2 spot starts for Joe Mixon, averaged 24 touches per game. I mentioned Lazard being a grinder. Perine also a true dog in the NFL. So I think he's a big winner in joining Denver.
Yeah, it really has. It depends most on Javonte Williams' knee, his recovery. And, last we heard, and you mentioned it, I think on Twitter, that we are on track season, quote unquote, on track season, where
everyone's on track. Just ask the coaches.
Week 1. So we shall see as to where he is at in a month or two. But I think, investing in Perine right now is a good idea. It just depends where his ADP lands. But if he's double-digit rounds, I think that's a really good value for a player who might start for the first half of the season or see quite a bit of time. And then Javonte Williams runs the risk of kind of being in and out of the lineup, on and off the injury report, missing some games later on, et cetera, because of complications with the knee. He had a late season injury, and it's really hard for these guys to turn it around and be 100% by week 1 and be ready to go, or even by week 4. So if they push it too quickly and he has a setback, that's kind of what happened to Dobbins, and you end up with other players coming in, Kenyon Drake, etc., coming in and having huge games for the Ravens. The same thing could happen with Perine, and he's usually available, and he's also, like, in terms of being available to play, and he's also a good pass catcher. So yeah, I think he will probably fly under the radar for most of the offseason with this on track discussion with Javonte Williams.
We will certainly be avoiding Javonte Williams, who is being drafted anywhere from the 6th to 8th round, until we get actual news that matters on an injury, because right now we should all be concerned. And finally, something that didn't move the needle too much, the Dolphins did reportedly call about Dalvin Cook, who I thought there was a really good chance he would get cut, considering he could save the Vikings roughly $9 million to make some moves. Dolphins called about him reportedly, didn't get anything done, and ended up re-signing both Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson. Although I think it's significant that Mostert got over $2 million more guaranteed money than Jeff Wilson. So your thoughts on the two returning to Miami?
I think they favor Mostert. I think we could see that last season with the way they were used, but he is a little bit injury prone in terms of, and his age is there too. So both players will have some games. They're going to probably be going in the 8th to 12th round between the two of them, depending on where their relative health is in the summer. But I would favor Mostert as sort of the upside play who's going to give you some big weeks, and if he's able to stay healthy. So that's the question there. And on that Minnesota discussion, is Alexander Mattison still going like 12th, 13th round in ADP? Because if he is, he's a free agent. We have Dalvin Cook possibly on the chopping block, or they maybe trade him away. Does Mattison end up sticking with the Vikings as their RB1? Does he go somewhere else as their RB1? Because he's like one of the most talented free agent running backs on the market. Double-digit draft pick right now. I think that's a tremendous value.
I completely agree with you. The issue, though, for Madison is that, like Austin Eckler requesting a trade, it's just not the right time. There are no spots available. That's why I worry about Bijan Robinson, about Jahmyr Gibbs, because where can these guys play? Like, we don't have openings right now for running backs in the NFL. So that's my only concern about Alexander Mattison and maybe Dalvin Cook then just sticking around.
There's a couple of comments and questions that maybe from the comment section maybe we could touch on, since these people have stuck with us for the live stream. But Khalil Herbert, we didn't really touch on him with David Montgomery moving on. I tweeted out, and I wonder what you think on this too. It's like, we do get excited about these guys when the job seems to open up, and then all of a sudden somebody else is signed. Like, this is a situation where Madison could go to Chicago and kind of screw over Herbert. But we should be excited about Herbert. People say, Dynasty people tell me it's time to sell. For me, it's time to move him up my redraft rankings, because it does appear that the path is clear for him to be the RB1 there. And he has shown, I love these guys that have shown that they can do it for a stretch and be productive players. So that's where I'm at on it. But yes, he needs to, I've been burned on this a few times. He needs to survive the draft and free agency and hope that they don't bring anybody in who's as good or better than him. What do you think, John?
Herbert is a player that does everything well, and I would be more than excited if he was given the workload. And early on in free agency, that's what it appears to be, since all they've done is still have Tristan Ebner, a inconsequential day 3 selection from last year, and they added Travis Homer, who's led Seattle's backfield in 3rd and 4th down pass routes the last 2 years. But even Homer, 2 years, $4 million, not money that mattered. My concern is, as I mentioned at the top of the show, all the draft picks they got back, and now suddenly have 4 picks in the first 63 selections in this year's draft. That's where I think they add the talent. And so that's why I'm lukewarm on Herbert right now. Not for his talent, but because I really do think we're going to get some impactful draft capital there in April.
And then Ronnie Johnson in the chat asked about Mixon. Maybe you could put it up on the screen there. Joe Mixon's had some off the field trouble.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So the question is, do the Bengals cut him? And if the outside football issues are resolved, where would you like to see Mixon land? I wonder about this now that Samjae Perine has moved on. Like, do the Bengals really part ways with Mixon at this point and start over at the running back position? I know they re-signed Trayvon Williams, right?
Former Aggie great Trevion Williams re-signed him. They still have Chris Evans on the roster, but then we're asking, is Trevion and Evans enough in place of Mixon? And the answer is no. Having said that, that maybe brings them into the RB sweepstakes because they can save pretty much the same exact money as the Cowboys did in cutting Ezekiel Elliott if they move on the Bengals from Joe Mixon. So I definitely still think that's a high possibility.
The Bengals don't strike me as an organization that is too concerned about off the field issues. They seem to take on troubled players. So I don't know if they're actually going to cut him or not. So obviously I think the best thing for him is to stay, especially with Perine out of the way. But where would he land? That really underlines your point, John, about the fact that there aren't a whole lot of openings available. So if he gets cut, where does he go where he can see his value stay the same or increase or not take too much of a hit? Because right now I've got him ranked as a mid to low end RB2, but that's just because I don't know where he's going to be.
And Joe Mixon's ADP is currently baked into the outcome of him not being in Cincinnati since he's going in the mid 6th round on Underdog right now. Paulsen, anything else coming out ahead of our next episode on Thursday for everyone?
Well, our fearless leader, Luis, wants me to get this Aaron Rodgers to the Jets player profile.
Our fearless leader is doing a lot of yelling in the background right now.
So he wants these player profiles up ASAP. So, the trade's not done. It looks likely to happen. So I will put together something this week. And then I will have another podcast with you tomorrow. So join us at the same time, same bad channel tomorrow to discuss the rest of the free agent news. And then I'll also be doing a free agency winners and losers probably next week to discuss some of these players whose value has gone up or down based on some of these signings.
For fantasy, as Paulsen mentioned, profiles free, free agency tracker free. Join the site. What are you doing? Jump in now. And we will be back yet again with the rest of offensive signings, fallouts from free agency tomorrow, Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time. If I can find the theme song.